My name's Jim Herbert of Berwick Timelines, and today I'm going to be doing another live video tour, this time across the other side of the river in Tweedmouth. I now live here, so it's a special interest to me. I did a couple of tours around this area for Heritage Open Days last year, so I'm not as familiar with the history of this area as I am of things like the Elizabethan walls, so I've got an idiot sheet with me that I'll be using to refer to occasionally. So let's make a start then. I'll just turn the camera around so you can see something prettier than me. We'll start with the old bridge. There'd been a bridge on this, well, just upstream of this site for centuries beforehand. There were 4 bridges just upstream of here. I've got some pictures with me, of course, showing some of them. This is a picture from something called The True Description of Berwick upon Tweed, and it shows quite a nice topographic picture of the bridge that was built in the 1470s. Tweedmouth is towards the bottom, and you can see this stone hexagonal tower that guarded the bridge on this side. Another similar age map is this one from one of Roland Johnson's maps of the walls of Berwick. Lovely sailing ship there, and this time you can see it sort of viewed from the side. You can still see the stone hexagonal tower, but you can see the wooden structure a bit more clearly. Now, this bridge was somewhat destroyed by in the winter one year. Icebergs were flowing down the river apparently. This is shadows getting, which way do I need to turn? That's better. This is very much drawing on the back of an envelope by a guy called James Birrell. And what it shows you at this point here, marked AB, it says in the text below, A and B is ye fall on ye bridge. Basically it was very badly damaged during this winter, and it was this bridge that James VI had to negotiate when he, oh, I'm just dropping all this, hang on. It was this bridge that James VI had to negotiate when he passed through Berwick on his way to London to claim the crown of England in 1603. And it said that he was so afeared for his life that he commanded a new stone bridge be built, and it's often cited as a symbol of his new united kingdom between Scotland and England. Whether that much is true or not, I don't know. It was James Birrell who was the architect of the bridge, and work commenced in 1611. It was completed enough in 1622 for traffic to pass over it, but it wasn't completed. I think it was the parapet that needed to be added still. It wasn't finished until 1633. It needs quite a bit of TLC at the moment. There are some bad bits of stonework in it, but if it's any consolation, it needed repointing about 70 years after it was finished. But it's quite a beautiful structure, isn't it? And it's quite amazing to think that this carried the A1, the Great North Road, until 1928, when its neighbouring bridge, the new bridge, was opened by the Prince of Wales, Edward, later Edward VIII, the one that abdicated. A lot of people poo-poo the bridge, but I think it's quite a wonderful structure. What else have we got here whilst I'm standing here? This area here This used to be a shipyard, can you believe? The first shipyard was over there on the other side of the river in Berwick, opened by a guy called Arthur Byram. But there was a Mr. Bruce that opened a shipyard here, and there was a Mr. Lee's shipyard further down the river in Tweedmouth. Bruce's shipyard closed in the early 19th century, but was quite an important shipyard at the time. The memorial site here, this has been a site of stonemasonry for some time. It was opened, I think it was in the 1840s, by a guy called William Wilson. He'd come from Scotland to do work on the Royal Border Bridge. But he set up a stonemason's shop here, and when it opens you'll be able to see some of his tools in Berwick Museum. The little building beyond the memorial building with the blue doors, hopefully you can see that, that's a fishing shield. Fishing shields are the buildings that the salmon fishermen used, and we can see a couple of the cobbles. I think that's Gardo Bat. They've all got wonderful names, these fisheries on the Tweed. Sadly, of course, no more. The whole industry finished, I think it's 1987, but during the summer there's usually fishermen here, more or less really as a tourist attraction, just to show how it was done. I've been told by good authority that this particular fishery was always pretty awful for the number of fish caught. Talking of stonemasons, or masonry anyway, here we have Tweedmouth War Memorial in the Queen's Gardens. There's 117 names of soldiers that fell in different wars from the First World War through to the Falklands. Perhaps not as impressive as the War Memorial in Berwick, but still it's a reminder of the fallen. It's called the Queen's Gardens because Her Majesty Elizabeth II, shortly after her coronation in the 1950s, was it 1954? I'm sure someone's going to correct me. There's a bit of a ceremony that's happened here. Some other interesting buildings. There's lots of pubs that are now forgotten. At the end of this road, the left-hand end, that was the Royal Hotel, and the cream building in between, that was the Union Hotel. The names got swapped around at some time, I can't remember why. They're all now part of, well, all three buildings are now care homes for the elderly. The cream-coloured house, that dates back to the 17th century, would you believe? One hint about that is the very steep roof that you see. The steep roof on a building is a very good sign that it might be of some antiquity, although there's a 19th century front that's been flagged on. Far more impressive though is Tweedmouth House. This is an 18th century house, and it may have been the site of a pub called the Virgin Inn. It was owned in 1822 by a guy called Mr. Robertson, who we'll come to a bit later in the tour. It's also thought to be the site that was mentioned by a writer called Tobias Smollett in his last book called The Expedition of Humphrey Clinker in 1771. He talks about a woman who possibly owns the inn here. It says something about, I have taken upon trial a Scotchman called Archie MacAlpin, an old soldier whose last master, a colonel, lately died at Berwick. The fellow is old and withered, but he has been recommended to me for his fidelity by Mrs. Humphreys, a very good sort of woman who keeps the inn at Tweedmouth, and is much respected by all the travellers on this road. So there you go, that might be the Virgin. Another pub is next door. This used to be, again, you can see the steep roof on it, and this used to be a pub called the Rising Sun. And there's modern windows in it now, of course, modern cladding to it. But in this window here, we can see a representation of a rising sun. So we'll just go for a little walk into the West End itself. It's quite a magnificent structure, the new bridge, I think. The Royal Tweed Bridge, it should be properly called. Held 2 world records at the time. The longest concrete structure in the world and the longest concrete arch in the world. Held the records for a couple of weeks, I believe. And it featured in various civil engineering magazines because of the revolutionary new concrete, reinforced concrete that was constructed from. Pudding Lane, that's an old way before the new bridge was built. I may as well talk about this now, actually. Tweedmouth is a very strange place, and what we think of as Tweedmouth now is completely different to how it used to be. This is a map, a 19th century map showing what Tweedmouth used to look like. So we are about here at the moment. You can see obviously there's no new bridge. There's the old bridge just making landfall there. But the great part of the area is taken up by this Tweedmouth Common. Basically in the old days Tweedmouth consisted of 2 major areas. There's the West End up here, we're looking around, and then there's the area to the south. It was completely transformed by the building of the new bridge, of course, and all the ex-council estates now occupy this area, all of this area really, and they were built in the 1920s and 30s, shortly after the bridge was constructed. What you used to have, in the way of the geography, you used to have the road coming over the old bridge, of course, and then it forked. You either went south and then up Kiln Hill, what we call the Harrow Bank down here, this diagonal road. This wasn't constructed until a lot later. You could then either turn left and head south, or you could go straight across and round up here to the Five Arches. Alternatively, you could turn north and head up around Blakewell Road and around West End Road and join up there. So you have this circle, this ring road around the Common up until the 1920s. Blakewell itself, I'll just mention this now before I forget it, when I was doing the tour for Real last year, someone said it was something to do with the Lord Blakewell associated with East Ord House. Now I haven't had time to check up on that. I'd always thought that it was derived from the name of a spring, the Black Well, simple as that. So here we have the West End as proper. The building straight ahead, that used to be the King's Arms. Not quite as salubrious as the one up Hyde Hill, I know, but still. A lot of modern developments here, of course, I think dating from the 1970s. And the building with the for sale sign up. This is, of course, the thatch. This dates way back. Used to be known variously as the Thatched House Inn or the Thatched House Tavern, but very originally in the 19th century, early 19th century, it was simply called Letters is one of the oddest pub names I've come across in my research of Berwick pubs. Presumably it has something to do with postal carriages, something like that. I really don't know. In any of the trade directories you get to do with Berwick upon Tweed, it doesn't mention this as a pub where you have carriers going anywhere. So who knows? An interesting feature in front of it is this lump of stone. It's called a louping stone. You can see how worn the steps are. This would have been used by gentlemen to get astride their horses after a night out, no doubt, or general use, I imagine. But I would say, just look at the wearing on those steps. It must be really, really old. And there's a similar one at the corner of Marygate and Church Street, at the corner of the town hall. Let's just take a walk across here. Now known as Blakewell Lane, this used to be called, yappy dog, this used to be called Parliamentary Close. And the word Parliament, of course, comes from the French to parler, meaning to talk. And there's conflicting ideas as to when this Parliament took place. But the research I've got is that it was preceding the Battle of Halidon Hill in 1333, so hence Parliament Close. So we'll just walk down here to Blakewell Road. One or two really relatively fine buildings here, like this one on the end, Riverside House. The nature of the road has changed somewhat. It's a lot smoother in its shape. It used to be far more jagged. It's been somewhat smoothed out in later years, though, presumably about the 1920s. There's nothing to see here now, which is a shame. But I was looking at a map from, when is it? The 1852 map of Berwick, the Ordnance Survey map. And I saw something really strange. Let me just get another of my maps. Here, the area that I circled, I'll just zoom in on it. Hopefully you can see in the centre of the red circle on the map are two concentric circles with what appears to be a flight of steps. I was thinking, what the heck's that? You know, we don't know whether the flight of steps is going up or whether it's going down. Let's just assume it's going up though, because I can't think why anything would be going down. It's hardly going to, you know, pits aren't really something that you have. So you have a structure there that appears to be something like a motte of a early medieval castle, but what for? And then I came across this map from 1769. It's by a military engineer called Armstrong, and that's a lot of Scotland and north of England. And look, we can see a windmill. And this makes perfect sense. You can imagine having a windmill on top of a mound. By 1852, of course, the windmill's long gone, but the mound still exists. And so this would have been somewhere behind these buildings here, in the centre of these buildings. Another interesting thing that we can see on the 1852 map is a structure, a huge structure that occupied the land where these houses are built. And it's this. With going back to the 1852 map, you can see the Tweed foundry. Now that, I think it was about 1800, a guy called Mr. Robertson, remember I told you about Robertson owning Tweedmouth House in 1822, he had a foundry already further down the river on the Tweedmouth side, along where Dock Road is. And he went into partnership with someone whose name I completely forget to form this one. It's quite a massive structure, and it's hard to believe in this tranquil domestic area that it would you have such a thing. You can see all sorts of things here, stores, potter's shop, is that? Lathe shop, quite a substantial structure, and you can just see it, just like a corner of it, you can see it in aerial photographs from the 1920s, early 1930s. So the building was certainly there till then. Whether it's still operational then, I'm not entirely sure. So we'll go for a little wander down Riverside Road. When I was doing the tours last year, this is a really good thing about doing these tours for real and getting interaction with people from the area, because you never know, they might know more than you do about something. Actually, they often do. And one chap talked to me about Bowers Crescent, and apparently Bower was somebody who worked at the iron foundry, and he developed a way of turning the iron slag into what is effectively you could call breeze blocks, and the buildings here were constructed using this construction method. How true that is, I don't know. If anyone knows something more about it, please tell me. Tweedmouth Bowling Club, very pretty in summer with all the flowers out. And down here there's an odd building. I'm just going to get my idiot sheet out to refer to. This is now a private residence, and it's actually a vegan bed and breakfast run by a very good friend of mine. Hello, Karen. It's pretty utilitarian though, isn't it? Which suggests a industrial use, and indeed it is. Now, as you said, go into the garden and you can get a better view of it, so I will, through the blue gates. I've never looked at it from this angle before. Of course, we shall maintain social distancing. Can't really see anything that gives anything away, sadly. I've been inside in the past. Obviously we can't at the moment with lockdown, but there are still all sorts of pipes and things. This was where are we? This was owned by a guy called Mr. Trainer. He came back from South Africa to his hometown, and he bought a laundry in the Berwick Laundry, an old school yard, which was behind where the Berwick Advertiser buildings are now, sort of occupied by the Berwick Workplace. And in 1911, he built this to facilitate his brand new, what was it termed as, a steam and electric laundry. In 1914, of course, they had the First World War, and a lot of his workers had to go off to fight. And it seems that he was having problems financially. He was basically conscripted himself to work for the military, cleaning uniforms, and I think he was also a member of the Royal Flying Corps, later the RAF at the time. And after the war, business didn't really do too well. He eventually, I think he let it out rather than selling it, because in 1922 there's a guy called Mr. R.G. Carr of the Elms in Berwick, up Castle Terrace, and he started a motorbike manufacturing business here, would you believe. He only stayed here about a year. Sorry, no, not a year, no, it's until 1930, I think it was. Carr was here building motorcycles. For any petrol heads out there, I'm sure you'll know more than I do. It took manufacture to somewhere in the Midlands after that, but it's still called the Berwick motorcycle. I don't think many were put into production, although they were shown at motorbike shows. I know nothing about motorbikes, but for petrol heads, apparently it had a 247cc Villiers engine, and there's some sort of special drive shaft about it. It was reported in various newspapers as having all sorts of wonderful features in it. After that, Trainer took it back and used it as a joiner's shop. Thank you, Loaf B&B. They've got a magnificent setting for it. Over there we can see the rowing club. Hopefully you can see the rowing club over the van. Slightly better if you perhaps through the trees. And the Royal Border Bridge, of course. A lot of this land, I was talking about the iron foundry. Apparently a lot of the land that I'm on at the moment, this is, well, you could call it reclaimed land. It's basically the slag from the iron foundry that was just dumped here and then just became consolidated upon. Just walking back to Blakewell Road. The building ahead of me with the turrets, it's one of the most fascinating buildings in Tweedmouth. It just looks so, well, different, doesn't it? This used to be, now let me get this right, consult my sheet. Yes, this is now the Watchtower Art Gallery that's now owned, private residence and gallery owned by a lovely lady called Kate Stevenson. She occasionally has various music events and other things going on inside. But the main purpose of it is to display her late husband's art. This was the, let me get this right, this was the English Presbyterian Free Church, built in 1848. Later it had various uses. I believe it was used by the Tweedmouth Cooperative Society for offices and the function hall inside. And next to it, this grass bank area here, this was the site of another church. This was the Presbyterian Church of Scotland, founded in 1783. It closed in 1972 and the congregation joined the St Andrew's Church of Scotland on Greenside Avenue. sorry, Greenside Avenue. Yes, Greenside Avenue, and then that in turn joined in with the English Presbyterian Church at Wallace Green. There aren't any really good photographs of it at all. This is about the only one there is, which is from the side looking backwards towards me. So you get an idea of the size of it. One of its most famous sons, and of course I completely forgot to mug this up, one of the most famous people to attend it would be the Tweedmouth poet and would-be poet and playwright John Mackay Wilson. He became, I think it was only the third editor of the Berwick Advertiser. I say he was an aspiring poet and playwright. He travelled down to Manchester and London a couple of times, trying to give lectures, that sort of thing, readings, but both times he fell on very hard times and he had to be bailed out. And the second of these times he was invited to be editor of the Tiser. He hated the idea though, I'm a romantic poet, I want to be able to think freely rather than having to be burdened down by boring stuff like news. But actually it was his great breakthrough. Because newspapers then weren't like our newspapers. They reported on world events, on national events, and there's only really little snippets of local news as we think of it today. And on slow news weeks, he'd basically fill up the space with his own poems and stories. And these became really popular and became published as a series of volumes known as Tales of the Borders. Sadly for Wilson though, he died a year after they started being published, at a very young age. I think he was only something like 34. But people continued to write them afterwards, and there's a very good website run by Andrew Eyre. So if you want to know more about that, about the Tales and Wilson's life, just Google Wilson's Tales Project. Just continue walking up the West End Road here. All modern buildings, lots of modern buildings here. And now we start getting into the 1920s developments. Just cross over to show you a little blink or you'll miss it thing. This iron pillar, what is it? I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. Could well be an old gas street lamp. I like to think this may have been made in the foundry next door. Why not? So I've had a look, there's no markings on it as far as I can see. Further up, hopefully you can see those two long blocks of buildings with 4 chimney stacks apiece on top. Those are known as the Tommy shops or the Tammy shops. The Royal Border Bridge that looms over us. This was opened in 1850, August 1850, by Queen Victoria. And there was a couple of thousand navvies that were brought in to build it. Now there's a book by a guy called Frederick Sheldon which dates to the 1870s, I think it is, 1879. I wouldn't trust anything he says unless taken with a bag of salt. He's another would-be poet like Wilson, and the language he uses is extremely flowery. He also rips off a lot of, this basic plagiarism. He rips off a lot of John Fuller's History of Berwick in 1799. It's almost word for word. But the one chapter that he writes about that's really interesting is the coming of the railways, because he would have been there. He would have seen it happening, a witness. And there's a lot of modern resonances to privatised railway building that we get today, or at least running of the railways. He talks about contractors and subcontractors and sub-subcontractors, and how everything is so badly managed because of this. And he talks about the navvies and the Tommy shops, hey there, and how they're not paid in money, but they're paid in company tokens, badly paid in company tokens. And the only place that they can exchange these tokens is in the company shops, the Tommy shops. So they're getting ripped off twice, low pay and then having to buy stuff at inflated prices. And a really interesting question is, where did these people actually stay? I've had discussions with various people, and the common agreement is that just beyond the bridge on Mill Farm, there's probably just a huge encampment of tents that they lived in, most of them. I suppose some of the better off might be able to afford lodgings in town. And you can find out all the statistics about the Royal Border Bridge, but on Wikipedia or wherever, but one of the most fascinating things I think about, and just think about this, the embankment that runs from the bridge around Tweedmouth, that contains 2 million tonnes of earth. 2 million tonnes, all of which would have had to be shifted by hand, probably. It's quite staggering how they did it. So hats off to the navvies. Now there's just one last little thing I'm going to show you. I mean, I could go further, I do on the real walk, but it's a bit of a long trek with dead end, so isn't really suitable for a live broadcast. Frankly, there's not a great deal to see. But I'm now on a pathway. It's called Yard Heads, and this stretches all the way, apart from sort of being broken up by a couple of roads, this stretches all the way from here across to the Harrow Bank. And this forms the boundary between what was old Tweedmouth West End and where Union Park Road is. That was where the common began. But here's an interesting house. Relatively grand, not the grandest of buildings. It's 19th century. It was a manse to the Free Presbyterian Church next door to it. And an interesting question that some people think about is, why is the front of it looking this way towards the railway viaduct? Why not have a nice view across to Berwick? Well, the simple answer is, of course, when it was built they would have had a nice view. There weren't any of these houses, the railway embankment wasn't there, all of that would have been fields. And I remember giving a talk to some school children, I forget what the heck it was about, to be honest, but I showed them a picture by local artist Frank W. Wood. He must have been perched up over yonder somewhere on top of the railway embankment to do his preliminary sketches, whatever. And I asked the kids the question, can you see what's missing in Tweedmouth? Blank faces all around. Someone piped up, Asda. Yeah, true, but if it had been there it would have been out of view. And none of them sort of clicked. But this whole area of houses, the whole of modern Tweedmouth, completely missing. It's just open fields that you're seeing, and that was in the 1920s. And it's a very, very different look, very different indeed. So I'll just wander along this little stretch of Yardheads a bit. There's the back of the watchtower. Look down into the yards below. So that, I think we'll call it a day, just a short little walk. So thank you very much if you've been watching live. I'll share this on YouTube, and if you've got any questions, please post them up and I'll try and get back to you. If you've got any suggestions of any tours that you'd like me to do, then please drop me a line at berwicktimelines at gmail.com, or just message me, whatever. So hopefully I shall see you soon. Thank you very much for watching. Bye for now.